Welcome to 21st Sports recap and reaction for the Washington Redskins at the Carolina Panthers in their Week 11 matchup played November 22nd, 2015. We're going to go over all the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis. And this was quite the dominant performance by Carolina. They scored 27 points off of turnovers, and Cam Newton is the first Carolina quarterback to throw 4 touchdown passes in the first half of a football game. He had 5 touchdown passes in this game, all of which went to different receivers. But this really, like I said, the turnovers was what got it going. Is early on in the first, Kirk Cousins was intercepted by Coleman, and that would end up setting up a touchdown by Cam Newton to John Stewart, a 12-yard pass with about 10 minutes left in the first quarter. Gano hit the extra point, and it was 7-0 Carolina. But then these two teams were trading scores early as the Redskins bounced right back with Kirk Cousins hitting Deshaun Jackson for a 56-yard touchdown. Hopkins hit the extra point, and this game was tied up at 7 apiece. And that was with about 8.5 minutes left in the first. Then Carolina comes back with a long 13-play drive going 78 yards, eating up almost 8 minutes of game clock, which would culminate in a 3-yard touchdown pass from Cam Newton to Mike Tolbert, the fullback, with less than a minute left in the first. And with the extra point by Graham Gano, it was 14-7 Panthers over the Redskins. But on the ensuing kickoff, Andre Roberts returned it 99 yards for the Redskins for the touchdown. Hopkins added the extra point, and this game was tied once again, this time at 14 apiece, with a half minute still left to play in the first quarter. So both teams would go 3 and out on their next possessions, and then Carolina would end up driving down the field, and they got down to the 2-yard line where Cam Newton hit Ted Ginn Jr. for a 2-yard touchdown pass. Gano added the extra point, and it was now 21-14 as the Carolina Panthers took back the lead, a lead that they would not relinquish. Of course, they hadn't relinquished the lead that they had started this game out with, although they allowed the Redskins to tie them twice, but they would start to run away with it at this point, here with 8.5 minutes still left to play in the first half. And so now the Redskins, what would happen on their next possession is Matt Jones would get lit up by Luke Kuechly. He forced the fumble. It was recovered by Davis. And so now with that fumble, that would set up the Panthers on the Washington 24. And Cam Newton would hit Greg Olsen for a 5-yard touchdown pass, his 4th of the first half. Graham Gano hit the extra point, and it was 28-14 with a little over 5 minutes still left to play in the second quarter. So now the Redskins would get the ball. They drive down the field. They got into field goal range about at the Carolina 32, and on 2nd and 16, Kirk Cousins was sacked by Ely, who forced the fumble, and so he recovered. And so now Carolina would take over on their own 38 after that fumble by Cousins. And on the final play of the first half, Graham Gano hit a 42-yard field goal to make it 31-14 Panthers at halftime. So what did the Redskins do on their first possession of the second half, their very first play from scrimmage in the third quarter? Well, they turned the ball over. As Kirk Cousins was sacked by Ben Wickery, he forced the fumble and recovered it. And so now Carolina would take over on the Washington 11-yard line for their first possession of the second half. And that would culminate in Cam Newton hitting Devin Funchess for a 5-yard touchdown. And that would make it 38-14 after the extra point by Graham Gano, and this is just over a minute into the third quarter. So these two teams were trading punts thereafter as the Redskins were held to 3 and outs on their next 2 possessions, and they would end up giving the ball to the Panthers at their own 22, Carolina's own 22. They would drive down into field goal range, and Graham Gano would hit a 48-yard field goal with about 4 minutes left in the third, and that made it 41-14 to 14. So now on the very next possession for the Redskins, they would end up with another turnover. This time Cousins hit Jordan Reed on a 1st and 10 from their own 45, and he would fumble the ball as Norman lit him up and Kuechly recovered. And so that would set up a field goal by Graham Gano in the 4th quarter as they would bring the 3rd quarter to a close. And they would drive all the way down to the Washington 7-yard line, but they weren't able to get into the end zone. So on 4th and 2, Graham Gano hit a 25-yard field goal, and that made it 44 to 14 as the Panthers had now scored 30 unanswered points after this game had been tied at 14 apiece after that 99-yard return by Roberts. And since then, it was all Carolina. So then after a couple of punts on the next few possessions, Carolina would end up with the ball with just over 2.5 minutes left. They had it on their own 4-yard line, backed up against their own end zone, and so they would bring out the punting unit on 4th down, and they ended up taking a safety. The punter sat there in the end zone, kind of waiting for someone to come close to him, trying to just kill the clock. At this point, there was less than a half minute left to play in this game. They took the safety, they made the smart play, and the Redskins would get one last play, which really at that point didn't matter, as the score now was 44 to 16, and that would be the final score of this game. As the Carolina Panthers remain perfect on this season. The Panthers are now 10-0, and they're 6-0 at home, and the Redskins remain winless on the road as they're 0-5 away from DC. They're 4-6 on the season, and of course Carolina has now got a 4-game lead in the NFC South. So the Panthers roll in this one. I mean, it started off, looking like it was going to be a high-scoring game. Of course, not very characteristic of the Panthers there, but really, you had that touchdown on special teams, and really, when you look at it, Carolina, they shut them down through the next 3 quarters of this game, as they shut them out in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quarters, and they only allowed the one offensive touchdown by the Redskins, and that was that 56-yard play when Cousins hit Deshaun Jackson. But they really were getting after Cousins, forcing him into turnovers. He had that interception and then those fumbles, as well as he had 2 fumbles, so 3 turnovers for Cousins, and of course a fumble by Jones and a fumble by Reed, as they had 5 turnovers in this game, and the Panthers also had 5 sacks as well. So a big effort by the defense, a big effort by the offense. Cam Newton ends up with 5 touchdowns in this game, and he was 21 for 34, 246 passing yards. He also had 4 carries for 16 rushing yards. And the Green Lantern, John Stewart, 21 carries for 102 yards. And Devin Funchess, leading receiver for Carolina, with 4 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown. Jericho Cotchery, 4 receptions for 57 yards. Greg Olsen, 3 receptions for 54 yards and a touchdown. Ted Ginn Jr., 5 receptions for 37 yards and a touchdown. Of course, John Stewart had 1 reception for 12 yards and a touchdown to go along with his 102 yards rushing, which gave him 114 total yards on the game. And the fullback, Mike Tolbert, 2 receptions for 5 yards, including a touchdown. And for Washington, Kirk Cousins, 22 for 30, 207 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. He had 1 carry for 4 yards. And the leading rusher for the Redskins was Thompson, just 4 carries for 10 yards. As again, we see teams that are not committed to the run not being able to get much done on the offensive side of the ball. That's not to say that you should necessarily be run heavy, but you got to have balance on offense, at least the semblance of balance. We look at the leading receiver in the game was actually Deshaun Jackson with 5 receptions for 87 yards and a touchdown. Of course, that was that 56-yard touchdown, which most of his yards came on that one play. And Jordan Reed, their tight end, had 6 receptions for 46 yards. He did have that fumble as well, though. And for the kickers, Graham Gano was perfect. So he had a monster game, 3 for 3 on the field goals, 5 for 5 on the extra points. Hopkins did not attempt a field goal. He was 2 for 2 on the extra points. And on defense for the Panthers, Ben Wickery with a sack and a forced fumble. Kuechly forced a fumble. Norman forced a fumble. Davis forced a fumble. Addison had 1.5 sacks. Coleman had an interception. Ely had a sack and a forced fumble. Love had a sack. And Dallaire had a half a sack as well. And for the Redskins, Kerrigan and Smith each had sacks. Now we look at the team stats. 27 first downs for Carolina, only 9 first downs for Washington, as they really got dominated by the Carolina defense. We look at third down, 7 for 14 for the Panthers on third down, 50% conversion rate. They did go for it once on fourth, did not convert. Of course, that was that safety where they did not punt the ball away. They just took the safety at the end of the game just to run the clock out, as they were up by 30 points before taking the safety. And for the Redskins on third down, just 2 for 9, only 22% converted. They went for it once on fourth down, and they actually did convert that fourth down opportunity. Then we look at total net yards, 368 for Carolina, just 186 for Washington. And yards on the ground that were netted, 142 rushing yards netted for the Panthers, just 14 yards netted for the Redskins. That means that Carolina had 10 times as many rushing yards as the Redskins. And I mean, if another team outrushes you by times 10, well, no, you look at the scoreboard and it's not a shocker that they lost by 38 points. We look at the net passing yards, 226 for Carolina. Newton was sacked twice, losing 20 yards. And for Washington, 172 yards netted through the air, as Cousins was sacked 5 times, losing 35 yards. And we look at the penalties in this game. A lot of penalties, actually. 9 penalties for the Redskins, 68 penalty yards. 8 penalties for Carolina, 66 penalty yards. And 5 fumbles for the Redskins. They lost 4 of them. The Panthers did fumble once, but they did not lose that fumble. And we look at the red zone, and the Panthers 5 for 6 in the red zone. That's a recipe for success, and that's 83% in the red zone. And for Washington, they did not make any trips to the red zone, as Carolina held them out of the red zone. And they only allowed that one offensive touchdown, that 56-yarder by Deshaun Jackson. And we look at the time of possession, 38 minutes and 7 seconds for the Panthers, 21 minutes, 53 seconds for the Redskins, as the Panthers nearly had the ball twice as much. So very dominant performance by Carolina, and they're now 10-0 on the season. It's the first time the Panthers have been 10-0 in their franchise history, as they've been coming up big time on both sides of the ball. Very dominant effort. Cam Newton is Superman, and the Carolina Panthers are the Justice League. You got the Green Lantern there with Jon Stewart. Thomas Davis is Batman, and I don't know, Luke Kuechly's the Flash, but a really dominant performance by Carolina. Let me know what you think, though, in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and had a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.